Assalamu alaikum, everybody. What I'll do, I'm going to recite the passage in sections, and we will do the translation and the commentary, and then we'll do the next section. Otherwise, it'll be quite long to go through. Just before we start, just to set the context, last time we covered Surah Baqarah, the preceding verses, and the context is the Prophet ﷺ is being addressed, and the Muslims are being addressed in the context of Medina, where this new message has come, and the existing people, the existing communities, religious communities, people of the Jewish faith, of the Christian faith, they are interacting with this message, and there are certain questions that they are raising about the message, and certain objections that they are raising. And the main one being is that there was this idea that certain groups of people, they are entitled to receive religious guidance and inspiration, and how dare it go to anybody else. So there was this kind of arrogance, this kind of conceit that we are the gatekeepers of knowledge and revelation is our birthright, and if anybody else claims it, it can't be true. So this idea is being challenged in the Quran, in the passage we're going to be reciting, and it's being addressed to the scholars, the rabbis of the time, who said that this message can't be right because revelation only belongs to our faith alone. So I'll pick up on some of those themes as we go along. So, I'll put the translation above the part I'm going to recite, and and the Arabic I've got here as well. If you want to follow the Arabic, you can do so as well. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذ أخذنا ميثاق بني إسرائيل لا تعبدون إلا الله وبالوالدين إحسانا وذي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وقولوا للناس حسنا وأقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة ثم توليتم إلا قليلا منكم وأنتم معرضون وإذ أخذنا ميثاقكم لا تسفكون دماءكم ولا تخرجون أنفسكم من دياركم ثم أقررتم وأنتم تشهدون. Translation: I seek refuge with Allah from the accursed shaitan. I begin in the name of Allah, the most kind, the most compassionate. Remember when we took a pledge from the children of Israel, worship none but God. Be good to your parents and kinsfolk, to orphans and the poor. Speak good words to all people. Keep up the prayer and pay the prescribed alms. Then all but a few of you turned away and paid no heed. We took a pledge from you. Do not shed one another's blood or drive one another from your homelands. You acknowledged it at the time, and you can testify to this. Okay, let's begin with the outward meaning of these verses. So the rabbis were saying, we are the chosen people of God. Revelation only comes to us. And then God is reminding them, okay, if that's the case, remember your pledge. Have you fulfilled your pledge that God made with you? And Allah is reminding them of the pledge. What was His pledge? And the pledge was, worship none but God, be good to your parents and kinsfolk, to orphans and the poor, speak good words to all people, keep up the prayer, and pay the prescribed alms. Now, something I mentioned last time, if you look at this list, this is a contract that God is making with the people of Bani Israel, with the Jewish people. And actually, it's also a contract that He's making with us. And the basis of this contract is very interesting. It takes you through the order in terms of hierarchy of how you connect with God. Okay, the priorities that God has set for us. So, for example, it starts off initially, worship none but God. So, the essence of the religion then is that you have to have this connection of God. And why is that important? Because somebody who doesn't have any concept of something bigger than them or greater than them, they have no accountability really. You know, you can do what you like, there's no accountability. However, if you have in your mind that actually you weren't sent on this earth by chance, all these gifts that you have, the intellect, choice, reason, they weren't given to you by chance, that one day you will be held accountable for all your actions. That changes the way you look at the world. That changes every choice that you make, whether it's going to be good or bad. You pause and ponder and think, okay, I'm going to be held accountable for what I do. So the first concept that's being promoted is this, that worship none but God. And then look at the next one. Now you might think, okay, it might say, you know, pray and fast. Actually, it doesn't say anything like that at all. The second concept then is be good to your parents. And this is a theme that runs through the Quran, that worship of God is linked with the service to humanity. And there's a group of people mentioned here. You start off with parents, because they're the closest to you. Then you look at your kinsfolk, your relationships with your relatives, then the orphans and the poor. So you can't have a religion without this core concept of looking after people, of the welfare of human beings. I'm going to show you a couple of just bullet points to just remind what the context was. So this discussion is about religious groups. People are claiming that they are the gatekeepers of religion. They are the sole inheritors of God's grace and bounties. And we're being reminded of the obligations and basis of religion. Like, you can't just say, okay, right, we claim to be the most pious people, we're the most holy, we are on the absolute truth. Everybody else is wrong. And the basis for that is because of who we are. We belong to this group, we call ourselves so-and-so, and therefore everything we believe is true. And this idea is being challenged. And actually, if you look today, you find this idea is around in many groups. Okay? Not just the Jewish faith or the Christian faith, it even exists among the Muslims as well. You have groups of people who think, well, because we belong to this group, we are absolutely 100% correct, everybody else is wrong. And actually what God is reminding us is, when you want to judge the truth of somebody, look at their value base. What values are underpinning their religion? Is it just purely self-interest? Is it just purely arrogance and pride that we are the most important people, we alone can tell you the truth, nobody else can? Or is it linked with service to humanity, welfare to other people? Is it linked to reason, objectivity? Okay, so what are the core values? And the core values are, first of all, connection with God, and the second aspect of that is connection with His creation. You can't claim to be a good person if you only think about God. You have to think about His creation as well. Because the way to manifest your obedience to God, your worship of God, is through service to His creatures. And the word worship, which I've translated, in Arabic, it doesn't mean what we understand in English. You know, when we say worship, the first image that comes to mind is somebody bowing down and prostrating. Actually, in Islam, the word ibadah doesn't mean necessarily that. It means devotion. It means that you give yourself, surrender yourself completely, and you do things for the pleasure of God. Not necessarily, it doesn't have to be acts of worship alone, but it includes acts of social welfare as well. So, for example, let's go back to this verse. I'm just going to stand up for a moment. Look at the order. Okay. The pledge, first of all, worship none but God. And then prayer and charity and zakat, they come right at the end. So what the things that we imagine are religion. So people, when they become religious, they start dressing in a certain way, they start praying, and we think these are the elements of religion. And they are. But actually, they come at the end. Okay. Religion first has to start with this concept of there is a creator, I'm going to be accountable, and he's put me on this earth to see that I can do the best, to do my best. And there's many verses in the Quran that when Allah talks about the purpose of creation. So for example, in Surah Al-Mulk, Allah says, الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُغَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. It is He who created death and life to test which one of you does the most beautiful actions, the most beautiful conduct. And that's the purpose of creation, to do the most beautiful things that you can. And I've highlighted a couple of words here. First word I've highlighted is pledge. In the Arabic is mithaq. And you can see this as a contract. This was a contract between God and the people. And actually, when you make a contract, it's two-sided. It's not just God saying, you do this. Actually, God has put obligations on himself as well as a part of the contract. And the contract is this, that you do all these things, and I will provide for you. I will give you good life. I will take care of your affairs and make sure that you live a happy life. And this is the second part we forget. Actually, this is a contract, it's a two-way process. If you do this, then there is an expectation that God will give you all of this, because God keeps His word, okay? Keeps His promise. So that's a really important point to remember, that actually it's not just a one-way process. God wants to engage with us, interact with us, and He wants certain things from us, but in return He will give us certain things. And those things, the ultimate thing He will give us is peace of mind. He will give us security, that tranquility, freedom from worry and anxiety. There's when God sent Adam, peace be upon him, onto earth, He said something very interesting. He said, if you follow my guidance, you will have no fear, khawf, and you will have no worry and grief and anxiety. Okay? Because this is a human condition. There are so many things that we get worried about. There are so many things that concern us, and we get anxious, we get nervous, we get depressed. It's because we realize we are so limited. We have no control over life. Even our own health we have no control over. Things can go wrong. You can wake up next day. I work in a school, and recently one of the healthiest members of staff, he works out every day, doesn't drink, doesn't smoke. He's just been diagnosed with throat cancer. And you think, okay, how can that be? There's no guarantees in life. Our life is completely in His hands. And this is one of the concepts of ibadah in Islam, that you realize how limited, how weak, and how powerless you are. And then this is where the concept of the Creator comes in. Once you realize that, you submit, that inner change has to start first. Now, if you start on the other way around, where you start with the religion, of the outward aspects of religion, without having a firm basis in this core concept of connecting with the Creator first, your religion will be a sham, really. You won't experience the full sweetness of faith unless you start with this process. So the order is very interesting. So you start off first recognizing God. And the reason I've highlighted the word good here, because in Arabic, the word used is ihsan. And it's a key term in the Islamic tradition, the word ihsan. And the word ihsan means excellence, it means perfection, and doing your best. And it has one other meaning, a technical meaning, which the Prophet explained to us in a very important hadith, where the Prophet, the angel, Gabriel, he came in the form of a human being. And it's a very long hadith, and the way it starts is this: the Prophet and his companion are sitting in the mosque one day, and this man comes in. He's completely spotless, not not a stain on his clothes. And nobody recognizes him because obviously he's a stranger, he's a traveller, but there's no signs of trouble on him. He goes all the way, pierces the crowds, goes over to the Prophet, puts his hands on the Prophet's knees, and he says, tell me about your religion. Yeah, teach me your religion. And one of the questions that he asks is, what is ihsan? Same word that I've highlighted here, good. What is ihsan? To be good. The word here is وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. And the Prophet explains the religious, the spiritual dimension of this word. And he says, ihsan is that you worship God as though you can see Him. Yeah. You worship God as though you can see Him, and if you can't do that, as though He can see you. Now, just ponder upon this. We took a pledge, worship none but God, and straight after the word ihsan is used, immediately after that phrase, the word ihsan is used. And so when you do all of these things, all the kind acts that you do to other people, it's from recognition of God. God's presence is there in your mind all the time, as though you can see God. And sometimes people say to me, how can you do that? How can you worship God as though you can see Him? We're not idolaters, we're not. And actually, what this means is that you recognize that every human being that you see, every item in nature, everything or anything in existence is being upheld and supported by God. It would not exist on its own. True existence only belongs to God. Every one of us here is being supported, upheld by God. That force, there is a force behind that upholding. And so whenever you do anything, any act of kindness, you do this with ihsan, with the thought in your mind that actually God is present here, with the presence of God, the recognition of God at all times. And then all of your social activities, social welfare, will also become an act of worship. But what I wanted to point out was the formal aspects of religion, prayer and zakat, charity, they are mentioned at the end. It's not that they're least important, it's because they are the symbols of what's gone before. So let's go back to the point. So prayer and fasting, they are the outward symbols and constant daily reminders of these values. So whenever you pray, it reminds you first of all your recognition of God, and it reminds you that you've got of your obligation towards other people as well. And charity, again, is an extension of that. So prayer and fasting, they're not just prayer and fasting, they are reminding you of the core values of religion, which are recognition of God and welfare with the people. So going back to the verse, charity begins at home. It starts off first of all with your parents. Starts off with your parents first. So if you can't show kindness and compassion towards those who are closest to you, there's very little chance that you're going to do that to those who are distant from you. Okay? So charity starts first of all. And let's go back to the verse and look at the order. Okay, so be good to your parents. And kinsfolk here, in Arabic it's dhil qurba, it's those your relatives, people in your family close to you. Maybe you've got blood relatives, so close relations. Then you're going further afield, the orphans and the poor. Okay? So the first lesson that we're being taught here is that actually, if you are saying that you want to be close to God, and you're saying you are a Muslim, you've submitted, surrendered inwardly to God, then you must start with charity at home. And charity doesn't just mean money. And it says, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Ihsan doesn't just mean money, it means the way you speak to people, the way you treat them. It encompasses every aspect of kindness. Not just, okay, right, I'm going to give you this amount of money a month and that's it, I've done my obligation. Every aspect is covered by that. Okay, so we briefly touched upon the meaning of ihsan. So it means excellence, perfection, recognition of God's perpetual presence. And that's the key point. Right, so wherever you are, Yesterday I was reading a saying of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, "Ittaq Allah haythu ma kunt." Be mindful of God wherever you may be. And that's really important, not just in the mosque, wherever you may be, out in the marketplace, at work, on the football pitch, wherever you are, be mindful of God. And that's the key point. Remembering God's perpetual presence. He's always here. One of the names of God is Al-Qayyum. Yeah? He upholds, He supports everything. Without God's force, nothing would be here, everything would collapse. So whenever you see anything in existence, you can see that God is there. Because, sometimes, miracles, sometimes the most simple things, we overlook the simple miracles. The miracle is that things exist. Nothingness is the norm. And if you imagine, nothingness is the norm, the miracle is that things exist. Just to make something, create something, to make it exist and stay and maintain it, that is a miracle. And we see this all around us all the time. Because there was nothingness. Nothingness is the norm. And this leads to the highest level of engagement with God. Right? Because otherwise, what you will get is, you will get the outward, external aspects, the ritualistic aspects of religion, but you won't be engaging with God. And when that happens, that leads to what we see around the world today. People killing in the name of religion. Because they've forgotten that second aspect. وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, of kindness to the people. That engagement, God's presence is absent. They don't see people as humans anymore. They don't see in every human face the reflection of God. They just don't see that at all. And what's happened is that middle process has been bypassed. And that's something that's really worrying, when people use religion and they've got only the outward aspect, the ritual aspects of religion, and they have forgotten the ihsan, the inner aspects. So, what can we learn from these verses? Lessons for life for us. Okay. First one, pledge, keep your promises. And especially the promise to God. Right? And you might think, I've never made any promise to God. But actually the fact that He's made you a human being, that is a contract in itself. He's given you all these qualities. And in the Quran, God tells us that He offered the trust of intellect, of reason, of choice, to the entire creation. It says, "Inna aradna al-amanata ala as-samawati wal-ardi wal-jibal," to the mountains, the heavens and the earth. This trust. But they all shuddered from it, but man took it on. Man took this intellect, this reasoning, power of reasoning, choice, man took it on. So, keep your promises, especially your divine contract. And I think that's a really important one. Because if you keep your divine contract in mind, you will fulfill all other obligations. Yeah? If you remember your ultimate obligation, that actually you are going to be accountable to God, you will be a very decent human being, because that will filter into every aspect of your life. And the third thing I put there, and for me I think this is something really, really important for religious people, is re-spiritualizing the external rituals of religion. Rituals are important. Rituals give us structure, they give us order, they give us a visual, a symbol that we can connect with. But if the ritual alone is there, there's no substance, there's no spirit to it, then it's just a form. It's not worth what it is, because all it's doing is promoting arrogance. Because sometimes you can need to, well, look, I'm more pious than you, I'm holier than you, I do this, look at my dress, look at the way. And that's because we've forgotten that these rituals initially were set up as a routine to give a structure. And you can try this in your own life. If you have no routine, no structure, it's very difficult for you to maintain certain things. Human beings need routine, need structure. Otherwise, we're very lazy. We won't do what we need to do. So the important thing for us is bringing back that spirituality into the rituals. Social activism, we should be out there helping people.
Starting off with family members who are struggling or who need support. And let me say one thing here, it's not always about financial support. Especially nowadays, just listening to somebody, just talking to somebody, just giving advice. Actually, that is more helpful and more needed today in a society where everybody is atomized. They're living in their own little bubbles. And the best you can do is give your time to people. And that is the ultimate, really nowadays, the ultimate thing you can give is your time to people.